Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Climate Dollars Gap report. We're going to be sharing with you some fresh analysis that's fresh off the press as of the last 24 hours, but many weeks and months has went into the preparation of information we're going to share with you. What we're going to talk about today is the Climate Dollars project with respect to the electrification of transport. Globally, we're in the midst of an industrial revolution where we're decarbonizing the global economy. Mark Carney estimates in the order of $200 trillion will need to be invested between now and 2050 globally in order to achieve our decarbonization targets. It's a huge opportunity. There are many co-benefits in terms of fuel savings and more comfortable homes and better air quality and jobs and exports and, of course, much lower greenhouse gas emissions. But what gets funded gets done, and that's the motivation of the Climate Dollars project. So we're monitoring in Canada against a required capital allocation plan for each of the major sectors, including transportation, what it would cost to decarbonize, what that means on an annual basis, and what's actually happening and not happening, and what the gap is and what we need to do to close that gap. So when you know what the gap is, then it's something you can go and close. So the three kind of principles are identify, quantify the investments needed to decarbonize the Canadian economy by major sector, quantify the existing levels of capital investment that are actually flowing into climate solutions. Easier in some sectors than others. Transportation is actually a really good sector on this front in terms of good information about the real economy. And then engage business, government, and other thought leaders in developing sector-based strategies for closing the gap, synthesizing the many different efforts that are going on, including that are being led and articulated by electric autonomy. So the transport decarbonization gap, Ralph Torrie, our Director of Research, who's been analyzing the transition to a clean economy for the better part of 4 decades, has prepared analysis that will be shared for the first time publicly today here with you. And I'm going to pass it over without further ado to my colleague, Ralph Torrie.
Got my own mic. Morning, everyone. Thank you, Toby. As Toby mentioned, this is the early results of a major project at Corporate Knights that's looking at what it would actually cost if we were taking the climate crisis seriously as the emergency that we sometimes say it is, and how that compares to the level of effort that we're currently putting into decarbonizing our economy. And we do this sector by sector. And today we're sharing with you our preliminary findings with regard to the road transportation. I was going to say transportation sector, but I'm going to say road transportation because I'm not going to be speaking or addressing emissions from aviation or marine or even from public transit per se, focusing in on what I think most of you are most interested in here at this conference, which is the vehicles. The transportation sector, as this slide shows with the pie chart, is responsible for 22% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. There's no other end-use sector that comes close. Oil and gas production is larger, but that's mostly production for export. So this is absolutely key to any hope we have of decarbonizing our economy. Now, there's a few numbers on the right hand of this slide that I want to draw your attention to and ask you just to keep them in your mind as we go through the remaining half dozen slides. First of all, there's about 30 million vehicles in this country, 22 personal and 6 million trucks. But more importantly, this is a very large, very expensive system. Canadians spend well over $200 billion every year buying vehicles, putting fuel in them, paying for parking facilities and the use of them, building the infrastructure, the roads and the bridges and everything else. That's easily $30 billion a year, and that's all government. Another $25 billion maintaining vehicles, and finally another $10 billion insuring them. And these are actually modest estimates, but the figure of about 10% of our economy being due to the road transportation system is a pretty widely accepted number. And the other 90% of the economy would fall apart without it. So this is absolutely a critical sector. And if you travel around the world, And in particular, if you go to developing countries, one of the things that you'll notice is that the rich countries and the highly developed countries, they've got good transportation systems. And if you let your transportation system fall behind, the entire prospects for economic prosperity start to disintegrate. So this is really, really important that we get this right and that we spend what needs to be spent to clean this system up. We think that that would cost about $666 billion between now and 2050. So that works out to, it's a sizable sum, but keep those bigger numbers in mind that I just mentioned. We spend over $200 billion every year on this system. But our current level of decarbonization of the road transportation sector is only about a tenth of what it needs to be if we're going to hit that number. And the way that we figured this out is that we developed a simulation of what a decarbonized Canadian road transportation sector would look like, vehicle by vehicle, charger by charger. We costed them, we costed the savings, we costed the maintenance savings and everything else. And the capital expenditures alone to make this transition added up, as I said, to about $666 billion. And that blue line way down at the bottom of the chart gives you a sense of just how far below our current level of effort falls compared to where we need to be. This is what we call the decarbonization CapEx gap. I'm just going to briefly show you three key components of it. First of all, household personal vehicles. Interestingly, most of the cost of what progress we are making in investing in decarbonizing our transportation sector is being made by households in this country. By far, the largest investment being made in electrifying our transportation system is the money that Canadian homeowners and households are putting down in order to pay the premium to get an electric vehicle. If we freeze at current market shares, we will have, Canadian households will have spent almost $50 billion just in capital cost premiums by 2050. But it needs to be, as I said a moment ago, 10 times that high. We need, well, almost 10. We need $385 billion, at which point we would have 28 million EVs representing 97% of the personal vehicle stock. So that's the future that we're talking about, and that's the gap that we're interested in. How do we close that gap? Another big contribution to the gap comes from the commercial trucks and the associated fleet charging networks. This needs $218 billion by 2050, and at the rate we're going in this sector, we'd be lucky to get to $10 billion. So we have a huge CapEx gap when it comes to commercial vehicles that we need to close if we want to have any hope of closing this sector. I think it will accelerate as large, you can see evidence of how that's going to happen right here. As the large fleet owners start to pivot to electric vehicles, they can make a big difference very quickly as compared to the individual householder making their decision. So again, a big gap and a big challenge to close that. And then the third component of that $600 billion gap that I wanted to highlight this morning is the public charging network. It's actually a relatively small contribution to the total capital investment that's going to be needed to decarbonize the sector. It's about 5%. But if you don't do it, the whole thing comes apart. It's really important for so many reasons that the public charging network stays out in front and is not lagging behind the adoption of electric vehicles. People need the confidence when they go to make that vehicle purchase decision that the public chargers will be where they need them, when they need them, no matter where they go. That's always been the allure of the private automobile. It lets you go wherever you want, whenever you want. And we've got to make that a reality for EV owners so that this is something they don't even worry about when they go into the showrooms. And this is a big gap, and it really is not something that's going to happen without the public investor and government getting involved, because after all, these are public chargers. So I'll leave you with this final slide, and then because I'm anxious to get to the Q&A. I think there's an awful lot of expertise in the room, obviously, that I'd like to hear from. But the good news is that when we costed the fuel and electricity net savings from this transition and added maintenance savings, and I just put in a nickel a kilometer. I think it's more than that, but I said, well, what if we save 5 cents a kilometer in maintenance? I mean, that's low. And we costed the carbon savings as well at the federal government's carbon price. And as you can see, the costs far outweigh, I should say the benefits far outweigh the costs. And you can run this through various economic algorithms, but the internal rate of return of this scenario with the carbon tax and the maintenance costs and everything included over the long run is north of 20%. This is a good deal. It's front-end loaded in terms of the investments needed, so those internal returns are a little bit lower on a shorter time horizon. But this is a good economic story, even before you start counting all of the other benefits that I'm not putting a dollar value on, like the cleaner air, the quieter neighborhoods, the better driving experience, and all of the other co-benefits that you know more about than I do that come with the transition to electric vehicles. So this is our first summary of the work we're doing in this particular sector. This is going to continue for the next couple of years as we refine this, as we talk to people like you, improve our assumptions and our analysis, and most importantly, as we convene conversations with thought leaders and opinion leaders like you on what it would take to break out of the too low incremental level of investment that we are currently putting into this and break through to the 10x 10 times higher level of capital investment that we need to get to, and we need to get to quickly if we are going to have any hope of being in the neighborhood of a zero carbon transportation system by 2050. So with those comments, Toby, I think I'll just leave it at that. It gives you a little bit to start with, and we're open for questions.
Okay, well, thanks, Ralph. I think you packed more insight into those 12 minutes about what it's going to take to actually decarbonize our electricity sector than I've more information per minute than I've ever seen in a presentation. And it's interesting. I was watching the audience as you were presenting that, and many in the audience were taking out their phones and snipping most of the slides. And I know that's what I do when I'm somewhere where I feel like I'm getting something that I want to hang on to as seed. But what Ralph said is this is a pretty good deal. Like when you look at the numbers, we're not cooking the books here. Cumulative net fuel savings when you minus out electricity costs if you're charging in non-peak hours of $1 trillion back in Canadians' pockets. $1 trillion back in Canadians' pockets through 2050 if we do this right. Just that alone, almost double what the capital costs are. So good deal, but in only 5% of this cost of this whole thing, making this whole thing happen, the critical linchpin is the charging infrastructure. So, and we're only doing about 5% of what we need to on the charging infrastructure. And it's not a heavy lift. Even when it peaks, as Ralph showed, it gets up to 1.5 billion per year, which in the environment we're working in, where the federal government's spending 15 billion a year on solutions alone, that's only 10% of that. So just 1.5 billion, and that's the high water mark for what we need to be deploying to get the charging network there. But we're only doing 5%. So 5% of the solution is charging, and we're only doing 5% of that 5%. If we stepped it up and did 100% of that 5%, some pretty interesting things would start to kick into gear. We have a lot of people with expertise, as Ralph referenced, and we'd love to take your questions. We have about 16 minutes, so I think we can get into several questions, so don't be shy. There's a microphone back there. We'd love to hear what you have to say and see if we can learn and share what we've learned.
Ralph, it's me, David Katz. So I have to say thank you to Corporate Knights. I'm David Katz, a former Ontario Hydro planner, so I've been down this road many times, and I just came from the Smart Grid session. So there's so much benefit, as Ralph just said, to the vehicles as it relates to our grid and the growth of that. What I'd like to put forward is we have the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association that were basically 4,000 people who during the previous feed-in tariff put solar on their roof. They've already bought into sustainability. How do we bring those and get your message out about them using that DC to charge their EV or to get the school bus in their smaller town? So I look forward to maybe seeing how we can do something together. And I'm on a U.S. thing where you could sell the electricity to your neighbor who needs it. And so we have transactive energy opportunities. We just have to get the regulations and the existing, greeners to buy in. So I welcome your comments on that.
It's interesting, and just to preface before Ralph comments, this analysis, and maybe Ralph can speak to this, it doesn't include the potential benefits to car owners of selling their electricity at peak times, which could make it even a lot more interesting.
That's what the IASO lady just said. The purpose is transportation, she said. But these batteries and the whole ultra low rate, it's one thing to get it at 2.4%, 2 cents or 2.5 cents at night, but you're going to pay 25 cents during the day. So people should be aware of the economics when rates are juggled.
Well, thanks for your point and your question, David. I actually wrote in an article not too long ago that I think when we look back at the electric vehicle 50 or 60 years from now, we will see it more as its most disruptive impact will not have been the electrification of transportation, which after all doesn't actually change the overall automobile dependence and transportation system that much. I think the most disruptive impact of the electric vehicle when we look back on it will be that it introduced millions of portable batteries into the electricity grid. And we are also looking at the electricity system as part of this project, and we're simulating that type of interaction. And I can tell you that it's critically important, or can be critically important, particularly in the evening period when the vehicle comes home and plugs in. And the system peaks when everybody has their lights and their audio visual on and they're making dinner and all of that. That's the time when the electric vehicles can make a huge contribution to smoothing out the day-to-day peak. Let them charge after midnight. I don't see the problem with that. They're not going to be that depleted in the first place. So looking at the electric vehicle as a portable battery is one of my favorite things to do. So I'm glad you brought that up, and we'll be addressing that further in our power sector analysis.
Thank you. I look forward to working
I don't
with
think
you.
it's any coincidence that General Motors, a big car company, the biggest car company at one time, has made major investments into the microgrid technology and the all of the technology of storage and what that's going to look like at the neighborhood level. So
we even have the Hydro one now has a DSO officer who is looking at how will these distribution companies be more than just the last wire to your house, because they have to control what's in the streets. They have to control the distribution system. And so I'm working with the Interstate Renewable Energy Co-op in the States, because they're way ahead on some states. And so I'll share that with you. Thank you.
Hey, Ralph. Thanks for all that great information, and particularly about the private sector being the main investor in this segment. And those are a lot of the early adopters like myself and a lot of people I know that have put the extra money up front. But that doesn't go very far. The average person either can't add that extra upfront cost in their budget. So where do you think the money could practically come from? Because from the automotive side, they're not financing anything of this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the low-cost electric vehicle has to get here, and the sooner the better. And cars in general have to become affordable again, and they're not now for a big slice of our population. You see, used vehicle sales are going up. People can't afford a new car, whether it's electric or not. Never mind the premium that's still there for the electric vehicle over its combustion counterpart. So we have to, the technology and the marketing and the business strategies for this sector have to get rid of that premium. As a physicist, I don't understand any fundamental reason why electric vehicles will not eventually be cheaper than combustion vehicles are in real terms. There's fewer parts. There's just lots of reasons to think that these will eventually be cheaper. But in the meantime, they're not. And furthermore, the low end is not being properly developed and provided, at least not here. If you look at what the cost of electric vehicles look like in China or in Russia where they're importing Chinese EVs and putting Russian shells on them, you can get an EV for $20,000. So I think this is going to be hugely disruptive to the North American car industry if it doesn't get out in front of it and start offering lower cost products. You only have to look at the phenomenon of e-bikes and e-scooters right in this city to see the pent-up demand that people have who can't necessarily afford $50,000 or $60,000 for an EV, but they can and need to have transportation to get around the city, places that TTC won't get them to. So I don't know if that addresses your question,
Yeah,
but there's
that's a great answer.
There's a missing piece in the electric vehicle market, and it's not going to stay missing.
Great, thank you.
Kent Rathwell, Sun Country Highway. Thanks for coming out today. You're right in regards to the battery storage side of things. When I first started looking at EVs, actually battery storage, it was around 2,000 a kilowatt. And I figured that we would never really get to that, to $20 a kilowatt, which we needed for grid storage, economical grid storage without the EV. So that's why I jumped into the EV space and electrified the Trans-Canada 12 years ago to create free-to-use EV transportation and prove to the world that EVs existed. They could travel for free. They could travel on infrastructure across nations and continents, right? And to get that battery storage price from 2,000 down to 20. Today, I know we're going to hit 20, which is a 99% reduction, right? From that point, I really believe we're going to get $2 a kilowatt down the road. That's not far away from 20 now, from the original 2,000, right? So, but once we have that $20 to $2 a kilowatt, EVs will be cheaper, period, and grid storage will be cheaper, and off-grid, off-grid power generation and storage economically, whether it's for businesses or communities or new cities from scratch, will definitely be feasible. So it's just a point that, you know, batteries have come down a long way and it justifies everything that you've been saying. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say that we're also looking at the building sector in the Climate Dollars project, where the key to decarbonization is the heat pump. And that does present challenges given the current storage technologies that's available to countries like Canada, who've got a big winter peak that has to be met. We need our buildings to be efficient. I'm giving you a preview of future sessions on the building sector. But in generally, I agree with you, the cost vectors. We have never in the history of energy technology, ever, for oil or gas or coal, seen costs come down like this. It's a completely unprecedented phenomenon, what has happened to the cost of solar and wind and battery storage in the last 20 years. I've been doing this kind of work for 40 years, and in the early years, you didn't dare assume that you could ever have a significant population of electric vehicles or heat pumps, because either you didn't even know about them or they were too expensive. And the same goes for renewable electricity. So technology is really giving us a boost here if we're smart enough to get the business strategies and public policies lined up to get it in place before the wildfires and the storms get us.
And your point was beautifully illustrated in California 3 weeks ago. I was actually really blown away by it because I see the pace and how the costs are coming down, but I still don't think of it as prime time in terms of overall stock. But in California 3 weeks ago, the biggest contributor to the power supply for one day was storage batteries. So that's pretty interesting. Biggest 30 million plus state. And there's 7 or 8 power sources, nuclear, gas, wind, all that stuff. But number one provider on that day, batteries. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Victor Drizio, individual investor. I have 3 or 4 questions, all kind of around the economics. One, for the public charging network, did you model level 2 or level 3 chargers? That'd be one. 2, what cost of capital did you use? What's the useful life you've assumed for the vehicles and batteries? And then what's the break-even point? It's all around the actual math of what you're talking about.
Okay, on the first question, we assume 40% of the public chargers will be level 3. We assumed an average cost per level 3 charge point of $100,000. I got some pushback from the Petro-Canada people. They found a way to spend $500,000 on a level 3 charging point, but those are high-end, high-power chargers that they're putting in that TransCanada network. So I'm not sure $100,000 a charge point is too far off. But so that's the first question, 40%. The second question was?
Cost of capital.
Cost of capital. I'm doing that analysis, but I didn't present it today. What I presented today were just the overnight capital costs of this transition. I did take a look at the internal rate of return of the whole scenario, and if you put everything in and run it out to 2050, it comes out at 25%. If you cut it off sooner, more on the horizon of a typical investor, then it comes down to 10 or 11%, but it's still not bad. So that would imply that if you have a cost of capital that's in that range, this is going to work. But we haven't actually, at this point, done a present value discounted cash flow analysis. Okay. I'm not sure what discount rate I would pick to do that. If you do it at the social discount rate, this is going to look beautiful. But if you put in what some private investors will be looking for, it's much more problematic. Which brings us right back to one of the central issues that the Climate Dollars Project is addressing, which is what needs to be, from a practical point of view, not an ideological point of view, but from a strictly practical point of view, what needs to be the role of the public investor in this transition. If these are things that are economically good to do, but have rates of return that fall below what private investors need, then we've got to solve that. We solved it for the oil sands, we solved it for the highway network, the electricity distribution system, any number of other big things that we've done in this country over the past 100 years. And if there was anything that's worth solving it for, surely it's the climate crisis. But it's definitely a central policy issue and business planning issue for the Climate Dollars Project. What was the third question?
More the useful life, and it doesn't.
Useful life. We assumed.
Yeah, useful life of the assets.
I assumed a 7% per year retirement rate for the personal vehicles, which is more or less, historically it's hovered in that range. And by the way, that is a killer. That means that right now, 25% of the personal vehicles in this country that are still on the road are more than 10 years old. So the fossil fuel vehicles that we put out there over the next 10 years, a lot of them are still going to be on the road in 2050, unless we can find, again, strategies and policies to make the electric vehicle so attractive that people will turn in their old combustion vehicle sooner than they might otherwise have. But 7% was what we
11-year useful life, that makes sense. Okay, thanks very much.
As an average, yes.
Okay, thanks.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Preeti. I'm from Seven Generations Education Institute based in Fort Frances, Ontario, and I myself am from Thunder Bay. And up north, we have a lot of discussion around the Ring of Fire, around mining, around getting the minerals and metals necessary to build these vehicles and batteries. So I'm wondering if the cost of the mining and securing the actual minerals that we need to build these batteries was taken into account in this analysis, because it really is the variable, I think, going forward is being able to secure those things that we need to build all of this. So I'm curious if that was considered.
We are looking, we're doing a whole separate look at the implications of the critical mineral demand that's rising, not only as a result of EVs, but the renewable electricity segment as well makes large demands on copper and a long list, cobalt, and a long list of other so-called critical minerals. So we will have more to say about that in the weeks and months ahead as we get deeper into it. For purpose of this first early look at the transportation sector, we're really looking at the investment at the level of the end user. So we took the costs of the electric vehicles as they are today, the premium, as reflecting all of the costs that are going into those vehicles, including the critical minerals. But the future supply, reliability of, and cost of critical minerals is one of those wild cards when one is trying to imagine what this transition will look like. And we're focused on it. And I'd love to stay in touch with you about this because we're getting into it now, and we need help. It's a difficult issue.
Okay, for sure. Thank you.
So thanks. We're at time now. The takeaway here is EVs are a good deal, but we need to step up the EV chargers big time. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating, your questions, contributions, and Ralph for the really excellent presentation. So maybe if you could join me in a round of applause for everyone. Thanks.